Hello. Um, Thank you for coming out today. I really appreciate seeing people here. I'm Ethan. I am the this year's Campus Impact Fellow with the Library and Learning Commons, working on the Campus Common Reading, which this year has been Grassroots. Hopefully, you have grabbed your copies already. It's a very good book. I really enjoyed getting to read through it. It's really good in a. I read it in a very non-linear style, very pick and choose before getting through everything. And I thought that was a neat experience. And I really like the idea of the book as well. Um, Quote I wanted to kind of pick out from the introduction from the editors who will be coming here soon. All right, we got it. Um, the quote I wanted to pick out is while the concept of grassroots means more than just activism, the task of reaching out to the community, gathering the stories of individuals, attempting to ensure a diversity of voices, and curating this collection of snapshots of the city we know and love is yet another strategy that we are using to create conversation and change in our community. I really liked how this book talked about activism in a different way than you might typically hear about activism, such as like protest and being like on in the streets. But there's a lot of different ways that it can look, and book's a really good exploration in that. And it does cover a very diverse array of issues. But one thing I did notice while reading it was there was not any queer voices included. And it's a limited book. There's only so much that can happen. No fault to anyone involved in the book for that. But that's why we're here today to talk a little bit. There is a queer activist history in Grand Rapids. There are quite a few people that took some risks and did some things to get to the point where we are today with, I believe, the second largest pride in the state, a very large one. And that did not come from nowhere. So thank you again for coming. And I'm going to start going through the presentation, which will be followed by a panel who will introduce when we get there. And before I forget, I did also put together a packet of some of our materials for some of the reading, some things that I found particularly interesting that were associated with the first Pride of Grand Rapids, and the kind of cultural uh, moments of that period. And those are out to the right side of the hallway. So, little kind of overview, general flow that we're going to go in. Going to start by zooming out into what was Pride looking like in the United States around the time that Grand Rapids had its first Pride. So, here we have a photo from Stonewall, sometimes called the First Pride, sometimes referred to as the Stonewall Riots. This happened in 1969 in New York City. At the Stonewall Inn, there was a police raid, which were pretty regular of all the gay bars at the time. But this one went a little bit different. There's a bit more of clashing, um, and it really kickstarted a broader movement for increased visibility from the queer community within the United States. And here is a lot of things happen in queer history, but starting from Stonewall and going up to the legalization of same-sex marriage in the United States. We have some kind of pivotal events, and I think it's really important to remember these dates because they are a lot more recent than they can feel sometimes. The fact that same sex marriage was not legalized until 2015. I'm pretty young and I remember that. Um, and a lot of these things were not that long ago, such as homosexuality still being listed as a mental disorder in the DSM 5 or being considered a disease by the World Health Organization. Um, the yellow bar that is up there, that is kind of a rough peak of the AIDS epidemic in the United States. You can see there was quite a bit happening around that time, and it's important to Grand Rapids' first Pride that it was happening around the AIDS epidemic. There was a lot of resources that were available at that Pride to do with getting funding and help for more research into AIDS, um, which was there's no word for that other than horrific, and a lot of the community did suffer a lot under that. So, 1988, the first Grand Rapids Pride. In the packet, do have the poster, and I'll show the poster up on the next slide, I believe, as well. Um, Sunday, June 19th of 1988, it was at the Monroe Center Amphitheater, Calder Plaza, and 1988, you're right there, right before the peak of the AIDS epidemic, but right after the large March on Washington, which was very important to the creation of the Grand Rapids Pride. You had a group of local activists who had gone to Washington, and there were a lot of people there at Washington, and this really big movement where queer people, for one of the first times, were very, very visible on this national scale. And this is a big time of a lot of social conservatism, a lot of don't ask, don't tell, don't talk about it. And so you get this group of activists, and they go to Washington, and they're around all these people, and there's this good energy, and they come back to Grand Rapids, and they want it here. Um, there were a couple of key figures that were really pivotal to that. I have a quote from a couple of them towards the back of this pamphlet as well. There is a memorial for Dennis Comack, who was one of the individuals who did go to the March on Washington and helped to organize the first Grand Rapids Pride, and also uh, owned and ran the Sons and Daughters bookshop with his husband, Brian Ribbons, who is also mentioned here. Brian Ribbons signed, oh, my bad. Natural transition, actually. This letter, there was a request to the to Mayor Hemholt of Grand Rapids to sign a declaration for a Pride Day, get some visibility. Um, and we get this letter, which is also available in the pamphlet. It's an interesting read if you'd like to. The mayor did not sign this day of declaration. Um, Pride was still able to go on. They got their permits, but there was a little bit of a tension with his response to not signing the letter. His reasoning was that if he signed that letter, well, he's denied a bunch of other days for other groups. One example he gave being the Nazi Party. So that was not the greatest thing to say in the world. People didn't particularly like that, comparing it to the Nazis, which there is another in the packet. There's a very sarcastic newspaper column where he makes a little callback to the mayor's Nazi comparison. Um, very, very tongue in cheek, very fun read. Um, this I found in a 2025 retrospective news article um, about the first Pride from Holly Vanskoy, who is also one of the prominent organizers. And I love this quote. I really do. I think this is a truly beautiful quote. We could see each other and be seen by other people, and that was important. And we could celebrate who we were and what we had already been doing, all of us in little places These people were having this business. These people were teachers. These people were lawyers. These people were doctors. These people were factory workers. These people rode motorcycles. These people came in Cadillacs and trucks. And when we got together, it looked like Grand Rapids. And I think that this quote really speaks to the value of visibility, because in this era of, this is predating the legalization of same sex marriage by a very good little while, or right before the peak of the AIDS epidemic. Don't ask, don't tell. You didn't get an opportunity to see your community come together in the same way. There was a lot of secrecy, and hiding and fear. So the fact that this event got put together, and you got to see all these people come from everywhere to just be who they were is truly truly beautiful. And that all that first pride, they kept doing prides every year after that. They did not stop doing them. Um, and the group that um, that group of individuals came to form what would eventually become the Grand Rapids Pride Center, which runs the Pride festivals in Grand Rapids today. Um, very, very good history there. We have a picture of the Sons and Daughters Bookshop, which unfortunately does not is not still open and running, but it was a big meeting place for a while. We do still have the Apartment Lounge, the oldest gay bar in Michigan, actually, and we got the Rainbow Road right in front of it. Um, and even more things have come about, like the Grand Rapids Trans Foundation, and the Lotus Brew coffee shop, which kind of spiritually continuing the legacy of having meeting places where you can see people as they are and talk. And when you do that, that's how you get things like this. It started with people talking and wanting something, and then they did it. Now we have this, and that is very, very beautiful. We do have some panel members. Unfortunately, Jazz McKinney will not be able to join us today from the Pride Center. So we do have someone to speak a little bit on what the Pride Center does. But if our panel members would be willing to step up.
I'm Elle, and I'm from Marketing and Communications. I did not expect to speak today, um, but I was hoping Jazz would be here. But I really wanted to talk about the Pride Center because they were foundational in from when the movement started, from the Pride event here to it was, I forget, the Gay and Lesbian Center, and it's gone through a lot of transitions to become more inclusive. I believe in 2020 is when they started introducing more of the Black Lives Matter um, movement and pairing it along with all gender and cultural and sexual identities. So, and right now, what they do is they have a lot of groups support for parents who have gay and trans children. They have groups for the people themselves, and they have just a safe space to go and be visible. Particularly right now, that's not true for a lot of young people. It's particularly harder on young people to be out with all the hate that's back out there right now, and the talk of wanting to repeal gay marriage and all the nonsense that's going on. But the Pride Center was pivotal in the entire movement. And I think it's important as far as the visibility to also be one of the things that Ethan and I talked about is you don't have to necessarily be involved in protests. You don't necessarily have to, except to vote, be politically active, and not everybody is built for that. You can support your organizations that do that work. Um, and I'm going to speak to this right now briefly. The Trans Foundation and the Pride Center had flooding. So if you know of people who would like to support them, you can go to either one of their websites and see how you can support them. They lost their space. They're not in their space right now. They're elsewhere, and that was a huge financial burden. So if you know people who would be interested or you're interested, I'm just going to put that out there. But yeah, so the the visibility and the type of activism can be what our panel members are going to talk about today. Nora and Stacia are on the Lift Group Strategic Initiative, and you can do those types of things in your own organization. Obviously, we're GRCC, but if you go elsewhere and or your personal lives supporting these groups and or becoming involved, like I said, with the organizations. That's all I have today.
All right, I got my questions pulled up, make sure I word them right. So the first thing we would like is if you could discuss the importance and role of visibility, resilience, and community organizing as it relates to your current roles and in your personal lives. Do you like to go down the line or?
Hello? Oh, great. Hi. My name is Zimone Kadak. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm the executive director at the Grand Rapids Trans Foundation. It's fun to be back on campus. I was a GRCC employee for 11 years and left, gosh, must be 4 years ago now to do this work full time. So thanks for having me back. Uh, yeah, I think it's it's a good question around what visibility and resilience and community building uh, is, and how our organization has sort of shifted into some of that. Like was mentioned, the Grand Rapids Pride Center has been around for a while, since the 80s. They're kind of the long-standing organization here in town. Grand Rapids Trans Foundation has been around for 10 years. We started because we saw that there was a gap in care, in resources, in community space for the trans and non-binary community here in town. Pride Center had, I think, a support group that was at the time very geared towards people just coming out. Nothing about celebration, only about support. They have shifted in a lot of important ways since then. But I think it's interesting because hearing about some of this history, which I really, really appreciate the presentation, because I think even here in town, a lot of people who are part of the community don't know the history here in town. Maybe there's a broader sense of the history, but um, the movement since the 70s and 80s has not been perfect. And I think nationwide and here regionally, there has been historically a larger focus on gay and lesbian rights. And the trans community has often been sensationalized, been seen, it's been viewed in this like respectability politics lens where they have been seen as like outsiders and holding the movement back. This is like the historical view of kind of trans folks, which is really kind of ironic because trans folks were kind of at the forefront of some of these things like the Stonewall riots that allowed for forward movement in rights. But because they presented less normatively, uh, they oftentimes have been pushed aside, under resourced, under focused on, and sometimes even used as political trading chips. In order to get this political thing for the lesbian and gay community, we will kind of bypass all of the issues and needs that the trans community is really struggling with right now. Um, I think we've seen a lot of really, really positive movement towards integrating all parts of the LGBTQIA plus community to really help um, find solidarity in each other's groups and actually have more of a political, a political stake in all of this. So I think when we started 10 years ago, it was specifically to highlight the trans community, to prop them up, to um, supply resources and supplies and social space and support space that could really um, make a meaningful dent in a lot of the ways that we saw kind of absences in the past. Um, we started off as an organization that basically was just giving scholarships, academic scholarships to the trans community because we saw it as a way to help folks shift into greater financial stability, employment stability, and to really highlight kind of trans people's stories in the city. Uh, I wrote up down a whole bunch of stuff for this question, and I haven't touched on it at all. But uh, I will say that I think visibility, just in general, is very important. We have seen, specifically back when kind of the queer liberation movement was getting started, people coming out, people being visible, people telling their stories. Our lives became less of a talking point or a one-dimensional stereotype, and we became real, actualized, humanized people, where other people in the in the community could see our humanity and know that we are neighbors, we are contributing to society, we are friends, lovers, family, all of that. So I think there is a real obviously visibility is kind of a tricky thing, especially now for the trans community. Uh, it definitely has put us kind of in the spotlight and much more easy to demonize and villainize. But I do think that at its heart, our organization is trying to create spaces where trans folks feel supported and able to be visible and able to kind of, um, seize their own narratives. Um, I've already probably talked too much. I'm happy to kind of loop back around to some of these other things. I don't want to hog the mic, so I'll stop there.
Thanks. That was wonderful. Hi, everybody. I'm Nora Neal, and my pronouns are she, her, and I'm queer. And I've been teaching at GRCC since 2008. And we've seen, I think I'm just going to speak a little bit to like what I have seen and experienced starting here then and some of the like cultural shifts and things that I've seen happen over time. So when I started in 2008, um, I was lucky to meet David Cope in the English department, who was pretty fearless in certain parts of his activism and was very interested in bringing more um, queer activism to campus. And one thing that we worked on early on together was creating the LGBTQ plus literature class. So together we got that class approved, and it's now been on our schedule for the last 18 years since that happened, or 16 years, or whatever whatever the math is there. Um, and so that was something that when I think about like I wouldn't say for myself, like looking back and say, oh, that was activism. But I think that speaks to how we might in our own lives think about opportunities where we have power and privilege to be able to be a part of something that could make a difference for a group of people that um, matter. And I think that that was part of like bringing some visibility to the campus that like we have this course. It's now transferable as a gen ed credit, I believe. So like that is a system piece. That's something that was kind of an early part of my introduction to how to be an activist on campus at GRCC, even though even saying those words feels a little bit uncomfortable for me, because I don't think of that sort of work as like activism in other ways. I might participate in activism outside of work. At that time, we had a board member who was very queer, very vocally anti-queer, who would talk a lot about um, his religion and about how and demonize really our population. So that was really a strong cultural element on campus. And I wrote something as a writer. I wrote something about gay marriage. Probably I don't know before I could get married. So before 2015, and I somebody commented to me that like they were worried if I was visible on campus as a non-tenured temporary faculty member, whatever my role was at that time, that that would put me in a really like risky situation to be out and being vocal about being queer, and that I might like want to think about that, or they would be concerned about like my professional job security and safety. So that was like some of the culture that I came into when I came on that campus. I came onto campus and was working. And at that time, like I really didn't know any other queer people who were working on campus. Like I just didn't, that was not something that I saw. It's still something that I feel like it can be scary to be out at GRCC at times. It can be not a place where um, being part of the LGBTQ community always feels like it's not always feeling like a safe place to be out and visible because of the world we live in. Though I do, of course, think that that's important and something that I value. Okay, I got really sidetracked with that backstory about the beginning of when I started here. I'm gonna pass it to Stacia and collect myself, and then we can come back to me.
Oh. Mike's 101. I'm bad at that. Hi, everybody. My name is Stacia Barzak. I use she, her, hers. I am the payroll manager within human resources and talent development here at GRCC. And I, along with Nora, as I think Nora and Elle mentioned, work with our strategic initiative to we go back and forth. Like, do we say the full name? Do we call it lift? And for to laugh a little bit and be lighthearted about it, but also scary times that we're in. And do we then go, well, it's a nice acronym, so we might as well just tuck it all in there and try to not be as visible with the work that we're doing. Um, and I think that speaks to a sign of the times. As far as my background and why I'm here, I am an ally, and this makes me a little sad on the inside for how old I actually am. But when Ethan was giving some of the history of the movement, and I'm thinking, yeah, well, I remember that time when I was in middle and high school at City High, which was at the time where the science building is now on our campus. And so I spent a lot of time downtown. I had, because it was considered an alternative high school within Grand Rapids Public Schools, I had, I think, exposure to some things that were maybe not the norm within West Michigan. And that helped build me into who I am and the idea of, um, can't we all just be here? And what is with the hate kind of thing is where I remember myself thinking as a young person. And then it felt like it kind of came full circle within the book. One of the pieces was written by somebody that I don't get to talk to much anymore because she's moved across the other side of the country, but that I went to high school with. And so I was like, oh, look at that. She's got a piece in here. And she talks mostly about um, her experience as a person with a foot in multiple races, but then also touches on her orientation and what that was like growing up in Grand Rapids. And I'm thinking, here's two people that had the same experience as young people and also very different experiences as young people. And so that was interesting to read in her voice as part of this. I've grown up in Grand Rapids, but I left and I came back, and um, my view is, I guess, multi-layered, but I felt like I grew up in mostly with my privilege of who I am, but I grew up in a place where I felt like, oh, we're open to a lot of things. And then when I went other places and people, oh, West Michigan, huh? What's that all about? And I I didn't realize, because that was not my lived experience, probably for a couple of reasons. First of all, because of the groups that I am already in and the privilege that I have that comes with those. And then also the circles that I was in or that I'd placed myself in where I felt like, no, I'm not seeing necessarily all of the bad that might be out there, because I'm surrounding myself with people that have different worldviews and different experiences, and we can have dialogue and conversation about that in what was then considered a safe space. And now I do, for the members of our GRCC community that feel like they're not getting the support that they need or don't feel safe. That is a place where I don't want to be in the world or in an institution. And so that's some of where my more grassroots activism comes from. What rooms can I be in to have conversations to help all of us? Because there's no reason for what some of our community members are experiencing, to just not have actual physical safety or feel like they can be treated the same as any other member of our community. Um, and so Nora and I and the people that work with our strategic initiative are trying to say, okay, what are some things that we can bring to campus? How can we have some voices heard? And then also the more fun stuff. I do stuff with payroll, but and she's English, but we're getting into some data points, right? So we're talking with some of our institutional research friends and looking at the data to say, okay, where is there representation that's lacking? What changes can be made institutionally? What do we have to report? What should we not report? What impacts people's safety if we are able to and then choose to report, and get into all of those conversations? And so that is, I think, a form of activism. The fact that we've got some very nice, I think, versions of different pride shirts that are fantastic to wear for actual visibility here to say, hey, GRCC's got some level of support. But then as I was thinking about this conversation, I thought back to a few months ago, some of my husband's extended family got together with us, and um, I was wearing this shirt, and he was like, "Are you wearing that because Great Aunt Mary is coming?" Because he thought like, "Oh, we're gonna push the envelope on a conversation that she might not want to have, and I might be known to come out swinging once in a while." And I said, "No, I didn't put this on purpose because we're going to see her, but also I'm not going to take it. This is what I was already wearing today. I'm not going to take it off because we're going to see someone that maybe needs to have some views challenged. So, and whether or not at any time those things come up in conversation, how can I not back down? How can I, at the very least, ask for some more information, get a conversation going, open up some of that communication? Other grassroots ways I think that I interact is not just being on a college campus where we have a variety of types of students, but still a lot that fall within that. The student development theory is my background of those impressionable years, the 18 to 24-year-olds. How can we impact some change there? But I have 4 stepkids that I can have some individual conversations with, that I can make sure, are we going to Pride and y'all coming to Pride with us, and unpacking anything that there might be to unpack, given that in a split household there might be some other values, and how do we work through those conversations with young people so that I want to hold on to this idea of the next generation. Not that my generation can't be scrappy and fix some things, but my knees hurt a lot, so I don't ski down the hill very much anymore. But I was just talking to somebody about the idea with downhill skiing is you've got to watch down the hill, right? And so that's my mindset of, I want to know what's coming and what happened before, but I got to watch down the hill. And so if I can impact younger people to help us not spiral further as a country, this is not a pep talk, you guys. But how can I impact that in individual conversations, in the actions that I take, in the conversations that I have with colleagues and others? And then when the call comes up to say, hey, would you be interested in doing some of this work? I hadn't interacted really with Nora before on campus, and we're big, small. So I was like, oh, I don't, but obviously this is a cool person if this is the work that is going to happen. So let's get together and see how we can impact some more of those conversations. So I will stop there and either say tag somebody else's it with the mic or another question or wherever we're going next.
I'd love to hop back in with just one more tiny thing. I think I do want to acknowledge that we're living in sort of scary times where a lot of us do feel maybe the pressure to invisibilize ourselves, like get out of the limelight, get out of public view for our own safety. And I think there is some value in considering that. But I do think that I think back to me growing up in rural Minnesota in a very small, very conservative, white town, and not the lack of representation, the lack of visibility in that town made me feel so incredibly isolated. It's not great for my mental health. There is power and a great deal of importance in being visible. I think if you were trans or queer in the audience right now, like being openly and visibly yourself helps that next generation to be able to witness and recognize, same scene, same, in a way that can be so incredibly powerful around this like resiliency question. I think visibility and community building and resilience are all so intricately entwined. And so I think I would encourage queer and trans people in the audience not to invisibilize yourself, to be that person for the next generation to see and feel connected and not feel so isolated. Isolation is a killer. And if you're not queer or trans, but you're an ally, I would also recommend you sit in a place of much more privilege than a lot of the people in our community. Don't invisibilize yourself as allies either. Like, we need your voice in this conversation. Um, yeah, I think America is also just so like pull yourself up by your bootstraps, individualized coded, where I think individualized resiliency can only get you so far. It really is um finding like-minded people and creating that community that is really going to allow us to all get through this. So I think I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's big. I think that on campus, like in my home life, my personal life, and on campus, finding the groups of people, like I think we were in the think tank together many years ago and like started there, and then just finding actual groups of people where we have a shared vision and we have some shared values has been enormous for my ability to stay connected and in it at work. Also at home for sure. And I just want to speak a little bit to this idea of um, safety and visibility and invisibility and resilience. So absolutely, sometimes I feel like I'm for sure in a bubble because the people I know, and my home community is very progressive, and we share a lot of the same ideas and we challenge each other, and it's a great system, and I feel very safe there. But I have a child, I have an 8-year-old, and sometimes when my wife and I are out in the community, our number one thing is safety. So sometimes we have had to say to our child, like, here's not a place where, especially if somebody can see us where we live and where we're going home, and it's like, it becomes very clear. Like, I'm out in the world, I look the way I look, and I don't think I shout queer person, but maybe I'm wrong about that. So anyway, I think that I can pass and I think I can become invisible. And I try not to do that when I'm out in the world by myself. But sometimes when I'm with my wife, then I start to look a lot gayer. And then we have our child, and people can pick up on this. We've been followed and stalked on a couple of occasions as a family, and so we have some, like, it's time for safety. So when we're walking together and we see somebody who we don't know in our neighborhood, sometimes we separate. And so, like, I will drop back, they will go to our home. I will walk separately when we see someone at a distance who could watch us walk home. And I think I'm just sharing that to say that, like, I do feel like I can make it through those times that are hard, and it's hard to have to explain that to a small person who we've really worked to have hard conversations with, and to try and teach to be anti-racist and to be inclusive to everybody, and to understand that gender is not binary and all of these things. And um to have to say, well, sometimes, like, it's not safe for our family to be out in the world because we don't want somebody who we don't know or trust to have too much information about us. And we can get through that because we have this community, because we have people who we know, and we talk about that. These are like, it's safe adults. We talk about the bullseye. Like, these are the people we're really close. This is we who we know we can go to their house if we need to. These are our really trusted people. And then these are the people who are way out there. And we've even like drawn that and created that. But it's not something that we're trying to do just the three of us to get through it. We do need that community. We do need to be out there and not have places where we can be fully ourselves, because that allows us to feel our humanity and to be human, and to get through the harder times that do come up.
I have a question for either one of you if you feel like you'd like to answer, especially because Nora, you just mentioned that you're in or that you keep a bubble. Do you, I'm thinking from like the social media aspect, do you keep anybody in those kind of circles that what you would not let in your bubble? And I'll tell you why I'm asking to help form what the question actually is. And I understand that I come from a different place. So, as far as safety and impacting my mental health. There is some of that, but not all of the layers, right? And there are people that once in a while, the husband or somebody else that I'm close to will say, "Oh, you're still, social media friends with that person?" Like, I shut that person down a long time ago. Um, as far as, like, don't follow the person anymore, or connect with them or whatever. And some people I feel like I have kept not out of the sense of responsibility, where you do hear that sometimes, "Wow, but that's my cousin and family," and eh. um for me, some of those people are like, "Well, that's how I know that person, because this person is my cousin," but I keep the profile because I need, and I probably answered my own question, but to a certain extent, I mean, my lens, right, coming from a straight cisgender woman who's got different layers, I keep that one cousin because I have otherwise a bubble, and I feel like I need to know on an individualized level. Like, I know there's crazy in the world, but I need to see it on some level to go, "Oh no, this is for real, for real. This is a real life person that I know," so that I don't get too much in my bubble and go, "No, everybody's coming along on the journey." Like, do either of you keep some of those people? And then maybe one of them will be like, I don't want to name names, but
No.
no, okay, and that's and
No, but I do want to say, like, our students are great, and like they're diverse, and they are going to remind me that the world is diverse, and I am going to love all of them. And um yep, yep.
and be a consummate professional, right?
I would say for my social media, it is fine if we have even widely varied, um, like belief systems, as long as they're willing to engage in like respectful conversation where they aren't coming at me hard, overly, like demonizing me or community members. Like, I think it has kind of been pared down because I feel like social media is not a good place for constructive conversation, and oftentimes things devolve into really hurtful or unnuanced or unfeeling sort of, So yeah, if someone's not willing to come at me respectfully, no, I will talk to you in real life if you want to talk to me, but yeah, I need to preserve some of my peace.
I think there's something about like the current dialogue where it's like people will say like, "Well, I get to have my opinions," but it's like there's a difference between your opinion and you saying that I am not a human with like, I'm not a human to you. And I think that some of that like rhetoric that we see is it does that. And so um that's like a line that I think you're kind of talking about too. Okay. Do you want to ask another question, Ethan?
I want to thank you guys for speaking to the complexity of visibility, especially in the current political climate. I think that's an important thing to note. All right. Grand Rapids Grassroots chronicles diverse movements ranging from moped clubs to immigration advocacy. In your current work, how do you see these unconventional or unique efforts, such as things like drag queen story hours, redefining the modern grassroots landscape?
I was thinking about this one. I don't know that I have a really good answer to this. And also I was not able to read the book in advance, so I do not know what the book touched on. But I think for me it's just really important to remember that grassroots efforts are super varied. They change over time. Um, they're not going to look the same now as they do 20 years from now, just like they didn't look the same 20 years in the past. Um, I think uh, for us in our current work, I don't know. It's hard to see it as some sort of unique path, but I'm sure we are the way that we are prioritizing at the Grand Rapids Trans Foundation, like shifting narratives around all of these like trans tragedy narratives that a lot of us were given growing up, and how do we shift into reframing it around gender euphoria and not gender dysphoria? What are those things that really make us feel more full and whole, instead of the things that feel like, I don't know, the kind of the negative side of things. I think about, actually, when I was considering this question, I remember back in the 90s when sort of AIDS activism was happening. There was a bunch of activists that covered a sitting senator's house in a giant condom. I don't know if some of you know this history, but essentially this sitting senator was really pushing hard against funding for HIV research and science around like actually ending the epidemic. And activists thought creatively and out of the box around like, how do we bring attention to something in kind of a silly way in some ways, and probably for the senator kind of an embarrassing way, like but sometimes I think back to activism and sort of grassroots efforts similar to that. Like, how do we remain fresh and silly and loud in a way that actually is catching people's attention, so that the narrative stays with us? I don't know that I can speak to Drag Queen Story Hour and how that factors into grassroots movements. Obviously, I'm pro like literacy for kids, and I think if it's a fun drag queen, that's great. But I think I think it's important to remember, even though I'm not going to speak maybe to the question specifically, just that there's like so many different ways that people can just get involved, that I think action is really the most important thing here. We're living in a time where it's so easy to just start doom scrolling and maybe like repost some stuff, but like not do any tangible actions. And I think if you can shift out of doom scrolling and into like an active space, get involved with other grassroots organizations, even if it's small, even if it's silly, even if it only like impacts your sphere of your family, maybe your, like, even if it's not big, I think there are a lot of things that people can do to help change minds, to stay visible, to like shift opinion, and shift the narrative. Yeah, I'll just leave it there.
Okay, so I'm totally agreeing about this idea of action, and I'm going to tell you a story about a tree. So, that is something that I'm feeling a lot in this current time, is like, okay, I want to be able to do something. I want to take action. I don't want to talk about it. I want to figure out ways that I can participate and make something happen. So a tree fell in a park right by my house, and it was majestic. It fell, and it was like the best climbing arch. It had so many branches. Children truly came from far and wide to climb on this tree. Adults were climbing on this tree. It was so wonderful. For 10 days, like, we left the tree. We saw a person who was like maybe 20 come out of the woods and go to climb the tree. We were like, please, city, keep this tree here forever. It's the best free jungle gym you will ever see. So then I get a message from my wife that's like, "Are they cutting down the tree?" And I hear the chainsaws in the distance. I'm like, "Oh, no." And my child has said from the start, like, when they come with the chainsaws, I'm going to lay on the tree. And I'm going to lay on the tree, and I'm not going to let them cut it. So I start like messaging all the neighbors, and I was like, all right, guys, you have to talk to these people. So, like, before I dropped her off at school, I pulled in, I went and talked to the people actually working, and I was like, will you at least save some of it? And they're like, it's above my pay grade. Like, I got to talk to my supervisor. I was like, please talk to the supervisor. So, like, then another kid starts Olympic speed walking to go and talk to them. So I drop her off at school, and I say, look, you got to go to school. You can't lay on the tree, but I'll go lay on the tree. So I drive back, I pull over while while the kids are talking to the city walkers. Apparently, I learned later they're chanting, "Hell no, we won't go," to the city workers, and they're like trying to convince them to keep the tree. I just go and like, I really don't like heights, but I climbed up the tree and I just laid on the tree like I was a sloth. I was like, I'm just laying on the tree, and like suddenly I see these like 6 men, and they're like very bright, which I shouldn't assume gender, right? Like, okay, there's 6 people with very bright vests, and they like start one by one realizing I'm laying on the tree they had just been trying to cut down. I see them take a picture of me, and then they come over and they're like, what's going on? Like, I'm like, I don't want you to cut this tree. Please don't cut this tree. And they were like, he's like, I can't stop this. Like, I'm just here to do the work. And I was like, I'm so sorry. I understand. And I'm not going to leave until you talk to, like, I talked to the supervisor who could actually make the decision. A police officer came. It was an hour of my life that was very important to me. But we ended on a compromise. The supervisor came out and I said, "Okay, I understand for liability reasons you can't leave this tree. You're worried somebody's going to get hurt, but could you leave like the biggest piece of it somewhere?" So it is not majestic. It is not as wonderful as it was, but we did reach a compromise, and I was really grateful that I could take action. But I think it's like training my mind, and trying to train my mind to be like, where is my opportunity that I can take action? I think looking at the activists in Minnesota, where they were dropping their white privilege in order to um, stand in front of people, it's like thinking about that, like how do we actually physically stand up when things are really hard, and how, like Stacia's saying, can we use our privilege? And like, I know it's silly, I was like laying on a tree and it was like very comical, but it was like, I was like, it's something I could do to bring more joy, I hope, like to try and savor the joy that this tree brought to like this one small community, and bringing people out of the woods to like enjoy and climb. So I guess that's just this idea of like action has really been kind of like sitting with me. And also like my friend Max coming over and being willing to talk to the men and use his privilege as a white cisgender man, um, to advocate for the tree too. And so it's like, how do we use our allyship? How do we use our privilege? How do we take action where we can? I think those are all big questions that I'm really thinking about these days.
I want a Nora story hour. That was fantastic. Like, it was majestic, and I was like, I'm all in. Tell me this story. That was fantastic. And then I'm thinking, you're using your privilege because you're like, I don't have to go to school. The 8-year-old's got to go to school. I'm privileged that I'm through school. So that's I love all of that. And at the possibility of completely derailing your question, sorry, Ethan, I'm taking a turn as we just talk about um so from the lens of stories, and again thinking about today and things that I've recently had conversations about, many or most of you probably know Valerie Hargraves, and just offhandedly she mentioned, hey, there's this podcast, and it wasn't even for me, it was for the husband that only fake works here, but he can't figure out podcasts. So I was like, well, she said to listen to a thing, so I'll listen to it. And it is a podcast about the author, and I always say his name wrong, Roald Dahl, right? Close, right? Yeah. And it's with a name like Stacia. I should be able to figure out Roald, but I'm like, that's different. And so I can't quite figure it out. So he wrote many things. So he's a prolific children's writer, like Willy Wonka and BFG and Matilda and all of the things. And that, not to spoil the whole podcast for you, but you should check it out. And it gets very deep into, okay, so he did this, but also here's all these other things. Like, he had this whole other life before he got to that point, and that's all very interesting, all these things before he gets to a point of being whatever the statistic is, that he's written more things or he's more read than all of these other children's writers combined. Okay, yay, good for him. And then also he challenges some things and it's not the typical children's writing. Okay, yay for him because he's putting these things out there and children can grapple with these conversations. And then spoiler alert, he's an anti-Semite. Wah wah. And so that is like this whole turn of these things that have come out, and the point being, okay, so what then? Now the podcast has now gotten to a point of what does that mean when you have additional information? Do you not, especially from the lens of this being art, do you stop digesting that art? Do you stop offering it up to children? Do you? And they gave these other examples of um, different works where they'd taken out certain words. Is that for the good of the people, or is it for um, now you're destroying what the original art was, be it written works or otherwise? And so it went through, like, I had all of the emotions of like, oh, let me learn about the person, and oh, all this background, and that's right, you can have multiple careers, and he was a spy and did all these things, and then was like, oh, right, Willy Wonka. um but then now it's to the point of, hey, it's way after the fact, um where all of this literature is still out there, but what do we do with new information? And when you're talking about stories and exposure to the next generation, and tying that all in with grassroots and the visibility and the conversations that need to happen, can the two things exist at once? Can this be a person that has views that I think, I would hope all or most of us would consider are not acceptable? And if he has those certain views, then what does that mean for other members of our society, and what were his potential views about those people? But also, are there still good pieces of the work? And can that then drive conversation with young people? And one of the people in the podcast is saying, hey, if I'm reading to my children, then that is an engagement level that's helping with literacy, that's helping with imagination. And either when the person is that young, pick an age, can we get into a conversation about who the author was and what might not be good about that person and how we combat that? Or at least maybe they remember the stories, and then when they're a little bit older and have some additional information about the person that wrote the story, is that a point at which it can be a touch point of dialogue to say, oh, I remember reading Matilda, and now I know, now I can understand more about who the author was, and I've got that dissonance. Okay, but now you can talk through it with something that you had experienced as a child, and then maybe that makes that conversation one that you're more willing to engage in. So that's been swirling around in my head just because it was a fascinating podcast, and thinking about um, having this conversation and how we impact change and engage in conversations, and which parts of a person, if any, do we say, oh, well, we'll put that aside. I don't know about that. But to engage in that dialogue, and it I feel is just all good fodder for conversation. And what are we going to have as acceptable in what we digest, be it an actual book, or, as we kind of talked about a little bit before, social media? Quite frankly, I think we just scrap it all and go climb the tree, because that sounds fantastic. But those are again, that's now I derailed this completely, but that was what I was thinking about based on all of these things kind of coming together at the same time.
Thank you. Um, do you categorize your own initiatives as grassroots by definition? Beyond your own work, what emerging local movements are currently catching your eye?
I think from the perspective of the Grand Rapids Trans Foundation, we've always I think we've always considered ourselves sort of a grassroots organization. We are institutionalized. We have a 501c3 status, but from the very beginning, we started as an organization that was created by trans people for trans people, um, and helping trans people in really, really tangible ways. Financial support, the community at large is, um, you know, underemployed, underhoused, has a lot of financial barriers to getting access to healthcare and things. So we wanted to really be sort of, even though we're a nonprofit, we sort of approached it from a mutual aid sort of, you know, stance. How do we, as members of the community, um, rally the community to help the community? So I would say yes. And over the last 10 years, we've definitely, become larger. We've gotten a space. I think we have become a little bit more institutionalized, but I think the work we do still feels very grassroots. Still feels very unmired by um, policy and bureaucracy. We really try to offer kind of like on the ground, tangible uh, work towards that. Uh, I think locally, the movements that I've been keeping an eye on, there's a lot of really important work happening in the city that is not trans oriented necessarily. Uh, I think most notably recently, I've been keeping an eye on the movement against police violence, specifically with the killings of Patrick Leoya and DeQuayne Johnson recently, among others. Uh, the queer and trans community is no stranger to police targeting and brutalization. Historically, the police were not our friends, and there is, like some uh, validity to thinking that the police is an organization of status quo and following the law, and the law isn't always right. And so I think uh, justice around police violence is something that I hold very dear, and I think our organization is really cognizant of. And I think, again, historically, I think the trans community specifically has been much more targeted by police violence than maybe even the rest of the LGBTQ community. I've also been following the work of COSECHA and Rapid Response to ICE. I think a lot of our movements are um, connected, and I think immigrants' rights and how we are treating our neighbors is also something that is important to us as an organization. And also, I've just seen a ton of there's a lot of other things happening in the city as well. Those are the two big ones. I also think that we have noticed that there's been a lot of mutual aid organizations popping up. A lot of them are trans folks being like, we need to figure out how to maintain access to healthcare, to resources, to having safe spaces. If people are coming in from less supportive states, how do we make sure that they find a space here in our city that is a little bit safer? There's a lot of internal conversations in the queer and trans community around mutual aid, safety, um, and maybe even, like political activism. But I do think there's a lot of other, activism and grassroots movements happening in the city that are really important and really intertwined with, our own liberation. So.
Great points. Yeah, I just echo all of that. I've been thinking a lot about immigrant rights lately and the work around that. And um, yeah, that's important. And I live in Kalamazoo, and the YWCA there is doing a lot of work of connecting different organizations to create um, opportunities for different groups to do different parts of the work and then come together under the YWCA's ability to create a greater system. And so there can be lots of groups coming together, um, and that the Y can kind of like organize that and create some systems around that. I think at GRCC, in terms of like, I mean, we're an institution, we're a pretty large organization, and I think that much of the work that happens around equity is created by just individual people coming together and finding out together, like, what can we do? Like, Lyft is like, we want to make it easier to be queer at GRCC. So, what are some ways to do that? Um, and who knows how to do it. And so like that is part of it. I mean, as many of you in the audience know, it took 10 years to have pronouns, to create a drop down for pronouns in the online center. So, that was, I guess it was
But is it in there now?
but is it in there now? I think so. I think so. But then it feeds into Canvas, and then what happens? I don't know. So, yeah, it's like individuals just finding what they can do and how they can make like small dents in a very large system. And I would say that that's kind of like a grassroots effort, and it's about like people just finding out what can they do, and when we have the community together, we all can bring our resources and then we kind of know how to get things done. And I think that's what Lyft has been trying to do, but it's been often hard to make that happen. Yeah.
A couple of the organizations or groups of people that I was thinking about just within our Grand Rapids area community, again, not necessarily LGBTQIA plus, but impactful, I think, still within members of our community. My sister-in-law had just mentioned she's part of she's Plainfield Township. So Plainfield Blue is a group that she works with, but I tried to ask her to go do something on Friday and she says, I can't, I'm on the bridge, which now I know what that means. There's a bridge, I think it's on Jupiter, where at 5 o'clock on Fridays, they're out there just saying like, hey, we want to let you know that we exist. And people usually are driving by and giving positive reinforcement. Not always the case, but the visibility of a small ish group of people, even though they've grown over time. And she just said to me recently, like, yeah, I got to be on the bridge because I didn't necessarily think it would go on this long. We're already an offshoot of another group, and this has been going on like every Friday for a year. Like, I didn't think that it would keep going that long. And that is a type of activism that I think is both tangible and not. Like, they're not standing out there giving funding for somebody to actually do a thing, but it's tangible in that I see you out there, and the people that are then giving their support are they're honking back. Like, there are actions that are happening in the visibility that then had enough momentum in an original group to then have a secondary group that's now a year out. And what does that mean for how that could snowball into the next thing? And then uh, maybe I just think more about it because I'm waxing poetic now that I'm thinking back to my high school days. But I had my commencement in Fountain Street Church because that's I went to City where it's a science building, and so we got no place else to have it close by. We didn't have our own facilities, and I'm just by my own nature, I'm a pretty secular person. But if I was going to church, not that that's the verb, but you get what I'm saying. Like Fountain Street Church might be where I would church. And watching again with some recent political things that have happened in the last few years, the fact that they've got a separate but related entity as a choice fund is something that is a tangible monetary thing that I think the disconnect for some people of how is a church supposed to church, and is this how churching works? And yeah, depending on your church, that might be how a church works, but that's not how everybody's church works. So it's kind of interesting to see that happen and for there to be a bold stance there. And so that's one that I think is just personally a fantastic option out there to have the community that comes from a group of people, and then again a separate, like, there it's their own organization but still under Fountain Street Church, that is providing support and funding to something that not everybody that churches would think is something that would be supported. So I kind of love that.
Thank you. Um, with our last roughly 15 minutes, we were going to open up questions to the audience. We would ask that you raise your hand and wait until the microphone comes to you so that your question can be picked up on the recording. Into the microphone.
See, it's not that easy to figure out if the mic is on or not.
And before we take questions, Ethan and I would like to challenge you all to think about a way you can get involved, no matter how big or small, no matter what group, because activism is activism. It doesn't matter as long as it's supportive, and there's a lot of intersectionality with it, and like for GRCC, hint, hint, pronouns in your email would be very, very helpful. Sorry, I had to throw that out. That's on our list for Lyft. So that's very supportive and very helpful. Um, I know I've gotten comments that, yeah, I like that. I like to see that. Flags, I've gotten comments from students saying, I really love your flag in your office. That's great. Are you guys supportive here? So just anything outside the box, any little thing that you can do to support any group is great. So do we have any audience questions for the panel or for Ethan? I'm going to go and then we'll come back to you.
Apologize, I cannot pronounce your first name.
Zamone.
You had mentioned something about being visible or non-visible and safety. Do you feel less safety in 2026 than you did 10 years ago?
The question is, do I feel less safe now than I did 10 years ago?
Something about safety a while ago. I raised my hand, but it wasn't
Mhm.
time to ask questions. So maybe I'm not getting across what you
Yeah.
had stated. But I'm wondering if it's because you're more visible, if that's why people don't feel as safe.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I do want to maybe start the answer by just saying that um the trans community has a broad spectrum of experience. My sort of particular, brand of genderqueer non-binariness is different than, let's say, a Black trans woman who, I think the way that I convey myself uh, externally is something that I could probably invisibilize if I wanted to. I choose not to, But I think for folks who have medically transitioned further, and I think especially when it's when some of these other marginalizations can be kind of like stacked on top of, like being a femme, being any sort of like marginalized racial identity on top of all of these other things. I think safety concerns kind of exponentially expands. So I'll say that uh, similar to Nora, I feel like there's a a, a bit of safety concerns, and also I do sit at some privileged intersections of identity where I'm not going to have to worry about safety in the same way that a Black trans woman is going to have to worry about safety. I think for me personally, I felt less safe 10 years ago, but I think predominantly the reason for that is that I was early on in kind of discovering who I was. I was unsure. I think I have kind of, I think the impacts of policy and law and, like violence is more real now, but I feel braver and not willing to back down and not willing to compromise on who I am. So I think it is less safe now. I do absolutely think it's less safe now in general. But do I feel less safe? I don't know. I think I'm so in the work that it's, I'm
Why do you think overall that it's less safe now? Is it because it's more visible?
I think visibility is a double-edged sword. Yes. I
have a
think that
cousin that I love dearly. He's 53 years old, and he has a partner, but he does not share any of that information. He's very private.
Mm,
If it wasn't for other family members and vacations, etc., we would never know. So everyone is different. Some of us are private, etc. So I know in the last 10 years, I hear more about gay and lesbians than I did, 15 years ago. So that is why I was wondering about your safety
yes,
because
absolutely.
it's more open. Thank
Yeah.
you.
With visibility, our stories, our experiences are much more front and center, which on the one hand helps to humanize us, helps to know that, help people to realize that we're just people living our lives. And on the other hand, it really has, like put us in the public eye in a way that we weren't necessarily before and can be targeted much more easily.
Yeah, and to add something to that, like for our students, that you, almost every semester, I have a couple of students who are out to me and maybe even the class, but do talk about how the places they live, it would not be safe for them to come out. So, like, there is that happening too, where like could lose their housing. They might not be psychologically safe if they were to be out with their people they live with or their families and they're so young, and so there's a lot of dependency. They would have more food insecurity. They might not be connected with groups of people yet, so like that is a factor as well, and is still like really present and happening, I think, for our youth for sure, and the students that we serve here.
Thank you. I'm Sheila. I use she, her pronouns. And thank you, Elle. Thank everyone for this panel. And I want to also thank you, Elle, because you answered my question with if we could include Ethan in the questions, because my question's really inspired by your work, if I may. And I just am really loved how you framed the panel and, clearly learned from your research as a campus impact fellow and your insights from the text. So um, do you have any further considerations based on your read of the book or your research in preparing for the panel that you can share with us to help us further, support students and faculty?
Let me. There's a lot of really good stuff in here. It's really worth sitting with and reading, and also like questioning in some ways. It's not gospel. It's good to still question it, because even like putting getting this put together was come from a questioning of this book. Even though it's something I really enjoyed, I think that things like this, it's an anthology, and you're always going to get something left out. Encyclopedias aren't comprehensive. You're always going to be missing something. But that talking this text and how it talks about plays, like there's one where it mentions the Fountain Hill and about how it sucks to drive up. Get stuck on the Fountain Hill. All these local places that you recognize, and even like I knew a couple of the authors of this book. These might be people that you know. And it's really useful to engage with your local environment in that way, because I think in the current age of social media that we're in, it's really easy to. We live in a really globalized world. You can see what's going on across the world at any time, but it can almost be a little harder to find out what's going on in your communities. Um, and I think that this text and even like the common reading as an idea is really useful in bringing back. Life is lived when we're here, like in our bodies and what we see and hear in the world around us. And I think that's important to remember.
So I just wanted to take a moment to actually recognize Ethan Tappan, our Campus Impact Fellow for the library. Can we just give him a great big round of applause for the work that he's done? I mean, he kind of helped with picking out stories that we could highlight and recognizing that the LGBTQIA plus voice was one that was minimally mentioned in the book, and he's just been like a really, 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 really good um, 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 participant in all of this, and so I appreciate your work. I appreciate everything you've done, and you should be celebrated for all of this. But I also want to give a shout out to Elle. Can we give them a round of applause? So thank you for the both of them in the work that they've done on this panel. Thank you, Elle.
Questions?
All right, we are 2 minutes before 1:30. So do our panelists have anything they would like to say before we send off?
Thanks for being here.
I'm gonna once again encourage you to, if you are spending a good portion of your day doom scrolling on the internet, to stop doing that and go do a literal thing, even if it's a very small literal thing. But yeah, start flexing those muscles around being brave in spaces, having hard conversations, showing up in whatever ways you can.
Now it works. Hi. Okay. Awesome. Thank everybody for coming is the first thing I would like to do. And to echo Sophia's comments, to thank both of you for having this space for conversation and for asking us to participate. And after I already mentioned how old I felt from one of the people that are in here, I thank Ethan for knowing what an encyclopedia is.
If we could also give our panelists a big round of applause. Thank you all for coming out today. We all really appreciate it. It's important to be able to have these sort of conversations and hear different ideas and perspectives. So I thank you a lot for giving your time.